time has stood still for me. I don't know what time it is, but it's the afternoon. And it's my real pleasure, but also almost impossible task to introduce today's speaker, Joe Price, who is our speaker today because he is the alum of the year, which is our highest honor, and is given to someone who represents all of the values of the school and more in one person. So we have the distinct pleasure of hearing from one of our most dedicated alumni in terms of what he's given to the school. Must I say, Joseph L. Price II. Professor Emeritus in the Department of Religious Studies and co-director of the Institute for Baseball Studies at Whittier College. Now, what matters to the school is not only your time as a student, but that's where it started. And so during his time as a student, Joe did something incredibly important to the school. He managed the coffee shop. He was also resident head of the college, went to White Sox games with Langdon Gilkey, won multiple awards, two NEH fellowships, and still found time to write a dissertation in 1982 to complete his PhD in theology. Since graduating, he's continued to represent, as you just saw, baseball, fellowships, dissertation, and management, the values of the school, coffee, the values of the school. Since graduating, he's continued to embody all those values. He's mentored generations of students and colleagues. He's been a pastor, has chaired innumerable committees, is a prolific writer, and has taken a scholarly lens to many different topics, including pop culture and sports. He also co-founded the Institute for Baseball Studies. In his writings, he's written 10 books, only 10 books, on Christian theology, the evolution and expansion of Islam, Paul Tillich, the National Anthem, and the Theology of Langdon Gilkey. He's written over 70 essays and more than 80 book reviews, book notes, and prefaces for the Journal of Religion, the Journal of American Academy of Religion, the Journal of the Scientific Study of Religion, Religious Studies Review, etc., etc. He's also served on the board, editorial board of, among others, the Journal of the American Academy of Religion and the Religious Studies Review. And if that were not enough, he has also published 6 poems. I'm here to read from one of them. No. His magnum opus, in the opinion of many of his friends, and you can tell the friends who share this opinion by the fact that they are wearing baseball ties, is probably his 1993 article for Criterion, Prolegomena to Percolation, Towards a Theology of Coffee and Coffee Shops. An avid volunteer, Joe previously headed the school's alumni council and is now an active member of the Baptist Theological Union Board of Trustees. He's also donated many of the books that you see behind those doors. It's my honor to welcome to the podium the alumnus of the year, Joe Price.
Around for who it was that the dean introduced. I don't recognize him. Thank you so much for being here. Initially, I want to express my sincere appreciation to the alumni who participated in the nomination process for this recognition, to the Alumni Council for its endorsement of their exaggerations, and to the BTU for its establishment of this award 70 years ago. I stand in awe of the roster of recipients of this award, whose significance in pursuing and promoting the study of religions, sacred texts, and theology so far exceeds my own work that I feel overwhelmed simply to be the utility infielder in their all-star lineup. But I dare say that few of the prior recognees have loved the Divinity School more than I. I could not be here today, though, without the incredible support of my wife, Connie, for she emotionally, intellectually, and financially supported me through my tenure as a student at this university and through my career at Whittier. And for its life-shaping influence, I want to express my deepest appreciation to the Divinity School itself. Its intellectual and spiritual vitality generated by a community of faculty and students, and to the coffee shop, where imaginative discussions ignite a firestorm of ideas. Let me use one of those coffee shop conversations from 1981 as an oblique entree into my unanticipated work on sports as religion, and thus my presentation this afternoon. When coffee shop manager Jamie Price returned to campus to receive his degree, we engaged in a wild discussion about what kind of conference he could sponsor in Atlanta in order to bring public attention to his introduction to religious studies courses in the curriculum at Georgia State University. Those were the dark ages, the pre-internet and pre-tweeting days, when newspapers and television were the most prominent sources of news. And since the sports pages are known to be the second most popular section in a newspaper, Jamie and I reasoned that a conference that might draw the public attention could be one that would appeal to Ted Turner, then owner of both the Braves and TBS. So we conjured up a program on sports and religion with the title Braves, Falcons, and Other Deities. To say the least, when he proposed the conference to his department chair, the idea fared as poorly as this year's Chicago Bulls. Still, I remained stimulated by the idea. 15 months later, as I joined the Whittier College faculty, one of my established colleagues there, a sociologist of sport, asked me, "If you could teach any course, Joe, what would it be?" Immediately I replied, "A course called Braves, Falcons, and Other Deities." He quickly said, "That's great. Let's team teach it in our winter term next year. We will call it Sport, Play, and Ritual, and don't worry, I'm chair of the curriculum committee." So to prepare for teaching that course, I began my scholarly work examining sports and religion, even though at that time I did not know of the fabulous work that had been done by two University of Chicago professors, John McAloon in anthropology and his work on the Olympics, and Mihai in his work on flow in the Department of Psychology. Frequently, my analyses have focused on the constructive possibilities of sports as, quote, a denomination of American civil religion by identifying their existential, experiential, mythical, ethical, and institutional aspects. This afternoon, I want to take a different swing at the topic by concentrating on some of their priestly functions before turning attention to two neglected aspects of the civil religion, especially as they apply to sports, particularly the perversion of spiritual practices and the prospects for prophetic pronouncements for action. Because of their secular character, professional sports in America are often perceived to be in conflict with religious traditions and values, even though the origin of various ball games can be traced to ancient religious rituals. Examining hieroglyphs and analyzing folk narratives, archaeologists and anthropologists, and perhaps we should say also art historians, these scholars have routinely identified ancient references to the use of balls in fertility and purity rites officiated by shamans and priests. In ancient Egypt, according to one anthropologist, quote, the antique ball game was more than a prayer for rain. It was an actual means of not only decanting the clouds, but for making the crops to sprout, and the earth to renew her winter weeds outworn. Ball game was a religious ceremonial instituted by pharaohs who were credited with miraculous powers over nature. Close quote. On a different continent in different centuries, archaeologists have examined pre-colonial bas-reliefs at ball courts in Mesoamerica and studied the Mayan creation story in the Popol Vuh to reconstruct the religious significance of the game of ball. Among North American native peoples, ball games also flourished in conjunction with spiritual rites. The divinely revealed seventh sacred rite of the Oglala Sioux was one of throwing the ball. And among the Choctaw and Cherokee, the complex rituals of Anetso involved several days of ceremonial preparation that included dietary restrictions, scarification, and ritual bathing by participants, as well as communal incantations and dances. So much for the ancient games. What about today? As American Studies scholar Alan Gutman has noted, quote, one of the strangest turns in the long, devious route that leads from primitive ritual to the World Series and Fußball-Weltmeisterschaft, yes, the World Cup. He said it in German so that it could be a scholarly article. Is the proclivity of modern sports to become a kind of secular faith. But the most obvious difference between our sports and theirs is the constant presence of medicine men and their performance of elaborate ritual acts which are, from our perspective, extraneous to the game. Close quote. Yet despite the apparent absence of priests and shamans, the performance of their ritual acts often defines some sports today, thereby intimating the residue of the sacred origin and significance of ball games. This point resonates with Mircea Eliade's insight that, quote, to whatever degree he may have desacralized the world, the man who has made his choice in favor of a profane life never succeeds in completely doing away with religious behavior, close quote. A half-century ago, Robert Bellah began his celebrated essay, Civil Religion in America, by positing that, quote, there actually exists alongside of and rather clearly differentiated from the churches an elaborate and well-institutionalized civil religion in America, close quote. While others had analyzed the phenomenon as the American way of life, Bellah detailed its socio-political character. His essay immediately began to stimulate multifarious responses from an array of esteemed sociologists, theologians, and historians, among them Martin Marty. In an essay about the characteristics and kinds of civil religion published shortly thereafter, Marty identified two distinct aspects of such common faith, the priestly and the prophetic. Quote, the priestly will normally be celebrative, affirmative, culture building. The prophetic will tend to be dialectical about civil religion, but with a predisposition toward judgment. Then, with his typically wordsmithing, he characterizes the priestly approach as one that, quote, comforts the affliction while the prophetic expression afflicts the comfortable. Despite the seemingly divergent trajectories of these two approaches, Marty maintains that in traditional religions, the two kinds are rarely discrete, often overlapping in obvious and various ways. Thus, he concludes, quote, a priest may judge and a prophet often does integrate people into a system of meaning and belonging, close quote. Expanding on Marty's classification, I want to comment also on a third type of religion, a demonic or corrupt one. It involves a perversion of priestly celebrations and devotees' practices that often provoke the courageous response of a prophet. Neither Bellah nor Marty initially identified sports as a distinct manifestation of civil religion, although there is recent evidence provided by the Big Belt Foundation that Marty Lombardi, through his lenses, has seen the light about the significance of baseball. So turning attention to the significance of sports in America, scholars from a range of disciplines and spiritual experiences have increasingly been prompted by Bella's analysis to consider the religious force that sports exert. In one of the first responses to Bella's essay, sociologist Philip Hammond noted that sports have a power to transmit civil religion. Shortly thereafter, theologian Michael Novak shunned the identification of sports as the civil religion of the U.S. or any other nation. Nevertheless, he insisted that sports are indeed, quote, a form of religion since they provide organized institutions, disciplines, and liturgies that structure the primary lived world of the vast majority of Americans, close quote. And before leaving the presidency of Yale to become the commissioner of Major League Baseball, Art Giamatti echoed these insights in the opening convocation for entering students at the university there. Seeking to identify a common chord in their disparate experiences, he declared, quote, because no single formal religion can embrace a people who hold so many faiths, including no particular formal faith at all, sports and politics are the civil surrogates for an American ever in quest for a covenant, close quote. Several years later, in his posthumously published Paean to Sports, he elaborated in this way, quote, it's possible to understand that sports in all their obsessive, overemphasized worship forms are an opiate to the masses, a drug to keep people docile or at least diverted from real problems, close quote. While Hammond, Novak, and Giamatti linked sports with civil religion, the idea dates back more than a century. Citing a new variety of religious experience, Morris Cohen, who had been a student of William James, published one of the first essays identifying baseball as a religion. Writing for the Dial in 1919, Cohen projected that centuries hence, when some archaeologist or historian or philosopher might try to describe American civilization and its religious life, the scholar would certainly speak of baseball itself. Acknowledging that baseball is a child's game as well as a professional sport, Cohen lamented, quote, that a properly cultured, serious person always feels like apologizing for attending a baseball game. But I still maintain that by all the canons of our modern books on comparative religion, baseball is a religion, and the only one that is not sectarian, but national. Close quote. Additionally, Cohen described baseball as a civil form of faith because it can redeem us from the petty concerns of daily life and because it can generate a mystic sense of community. Then aligning this spiritual lore of the game with its political potential, Cohen further envisioned that international baseball competition could provide a non-violent way to settle disputes. He reasoned that, quote, national rivalries and aspirations could find their intensest expression in a close international pennant race. And yet such rivalry would not be incompatible with the establishment of the true church universal in which all men would feel their brotherhood in the infinite game, close quote. As the insights of Cohen, Novak, and Giamatti suggest, when sports are understood as a species of civil religion, they have often been celebrated for their priestly practices. For the most part, scholarly works in the emerging integrated field of sports and religion have pursued either of two distinct priestly paths. Works in the first approach, known as muscular faith, have examined the overlapping area between sports and spirituality by focusing on how established religious communities have engaged sports, especially considering how they have adopted or adapted various games. This practice of baptizing sports into evangelical ministries is one that sociologist Charles Page in 1952 called the basketballization of the church. Now, in the records that I have from my father's former church, the church bulletin in October of, or let's see, late September of 1952 featured the softball championship. Now it raises a number of questions because this was the worship bulletin for the Sunday service that featured softball on the front. I never thought of my father as endorsing it quite that much. But secondly, it raises an unusual question to me. Why do Baptists have a liturgical year that identifies October as the beginning? Because this is number 51 in the series, and it's the next to last Sunday of September. BTU members, please solve that. Okay. A second priestly path that scholars have examined considers sports as an expression of faith or as commanding religious devotion. Studies utilizing this perspective have taken several distinct approaches, such as an examination an examination of the nature of play and its relation to ritual. Secondly, an exploration of the spiritual experience of athletes in competition. Thirdly, an analysis of the passionate devotion and bonding of fans. When scholars take one of these approaches, they often reflect on the priestly role of sports to enrich a sense of meaning and belonging in an athlete or fan's life. In addition to my own work in this arena are two engaging works by two fellow Gibb School alumni, Eric Van Selbo and Craig Thorney. Game Day in God surveys the religious character of football in the South, and the Holy Trinity of American sports examines the roles of baseball, basketball, and football in shaping an American civil religion. In contrast to the priestly presence associated with the Nexo and the Mayan ball game, multiple rites in modern sports are accomplished in the apparent absence of divine or ordained leaders. Let me focus on three: the establishment of a liturgical calendar, the consecration of sacred space, and a ministry of healing to those who suffer. First, the liturgical calendar. In the Christian calendar, the priestly function of making a year spiritually meaningful is delineated by the identification of, among other seasons and celebrations, Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, Easter, Pentecost. Somewhat comparably, a sports year operates with an annual liturgical cycle of distinct but overlapping seasons for baseball, football, basketball, hockey, and soccer, each of which enjoys particular feast days like Opening Day, an All-Star Game, and climatic championship series such as March Madness or the World Series. While sports seasons and festivals create a restorative rhythm within ordinary time, the sites for sports demarcate a specific area that is functionally separate from ordinary space, thereby generating expectations for an extraordinary experience to take place therein. In this regard, eminent cultural historian Johann Huizinga noted that, quote, formally speaking, there is no distinction whatever between marking out a space for a sacred purpose and marking it out for purposes of sheer play. The turf, the tennis court, the chessboard, and pavement hopscotch cannot formally be distinguished from the temple or the magic circle. Close quote. In America, the consecrating ritual for sports spaces frequently involves the performance of the national anthem, thus blending the political activities with sporting events. And for festivals like the World Series or Super Bowl, governmental sanction of the space and events is often completed by a flyover of military aircraft. This photograph was taken during some field research that Donald Musser and I were doing at the 1989 Super Bowl in Miami, which the 49ers won over the Bengals, but we'll say that. Ask him about his experience there. Whatever the game, within the boundaries of the demarcated or consecrated space for play, special rules apply that permit certain normally rude or illegal actions, like blocking or tackling another person. As previous Div School alumna of the year, Catherine Albanese has written, quote, "By setting up boundaries and defining the space of the game, sports have helped Americans fit a grid to their own experience in order to define it and give it structure. So it is not surprising that public games have given people a code of conduct for everyday living." Close quote. The spiritual experience of baseball parks is also recognized by the frequency of their use for recognizable religious ceremonies like papal masses, weddings, and memorial tributes. So popular are baseball parks for wedding ceremonies that Modern Bride has run a feature story on that attractive possibility. And several professional teams have marketed various packages to engage couples. The St. Louis Cardinals, for instance. How appropriate in the name of Corpus. Okay. Offer an MVP package for $8,000 that covers the rental fee of their Redbird Club Lounge, 2 hours of field access, including photos of the wedding party in the dugout, the ceremony at home plate as a sports altar, accommodation for guests in box seats and behind home plate, and the use of the scoreboard and the sound system throughout the ceremony. But not only have Major League ballparks been marketing in such a way, so have minor league ballparks like the Bowie Bay Sox in Maryland. Not only are marriage ceremonies conducted at stadia, so too are rites related to death. One of the most recognizable is the establishment of Memorial Park at Yankee Stadium beyond the center field fence, where steels and plaques mark the space like headstones in a New England graveyard. More definitive as a place for burial, however, are sites where several fervent fans have had their ashes placed. At Wrigley Field, the remains of songwriter Steve Goodman, who composed Go Cubs Go, were interred beneath home plate. I'll take you a moment to get some water while you are able to enjoy. At Old Yankee Stadium, Eddie Elner spread the ashes of his grandmother in the batter's box and along the outfield warning track to fulfill her dying wish. And recently, Tom McDonald, a lifelong friend of Roy Regal, a plumber and passionate Mets fan, honored his deceased baseball pal by flushing portions of his ashes down urinals in the ballparks that they had visited together. Whether in reference to the grandeur of a major league stadium or a simple minor league field, the veneration of a ballpark is perhaps best recognized by Ray Kinsella in the novel Shoeless Joe. After querying his companions about whether they had spent time in an empty ballpark in the dark, Kinsella asserts, quote, "There's something both eerie and holy about it. A ballpark at night is more like a church than a church." And as this shot of the game between the Scranton Wilkes-Barre Yankees and the Norfolk Tide indicates, it's like a church. It's candlelit at night with nobody there. Related to this reverential perception of space, another priestly function of sports can be discerned in the consoling and healing rituals that take place at stadia. Often the ceremonies feature celebrated players who exercise pastoral care in times of community crises and personal illness. Perhaps the most notable expressions of pastoral care are the visits by Babe Ruth to hospitalized children in orphanages. Yet because stadia provides solemn space that appeals to diverse spiritual and cultural backgrounds of citizens, The ballparks, the stadia, often provide a religiously neutral but reverential site for conducting civic ceremonies of mourning, services to promote public healing. As examples of the power of sports to heal communities, several recent games following mass tragedies and disasters come to mind. During the pregame ceremonies for the first game in Fenway Park following the bombing at the Boston Marathon, Boston designated hitter served as the designated chaplain for the occasion. "All right, Boston," Big Poppy began as he clapped his hands. "This jersey that we wear today, it doesn't say Red Sox, it says Boston. We want to thank the mayor, the governor, and the whole police department for the great job that they did this past week." Then, with the righteous anger of a prophet, he dropped an F-bomb. "This is our fucking city and nobody's going to dictate our freedom. Stay strong." Broadcast live. The language was not bleeped. Instead of levying a fine against the network, the chairman of the FCC surprisingly tweeted, "This is a wonderful act of community leadership, and the government shouldn't be discouraging it, but should be encouraging it." And President Obama called it, quote, "a proud moment in America," close quote. Also commenting on Ortiz's heartfelt half-minute speech, an ESPN analyst identified it as, quote, "the most transcendent moment of a possible Hall of Fame career," close quote. In part, his extemporaneous words functioned as an expository civic prayer for the community. Another example of the healing power of sports. Following the massacre at the Harvest Music Festival in Las Vegas, the Las Vegas Golden Knights in the NHL surprisingly made it to the finals of the Stanley Cup. Ben Hubble, one of my former students who works as an analyst in a casino there, sent me the following email. Quote, "Looking at the juxtaposition of two newspaper articles about the hockey playoffs and the enduring trauma caused by the massacre, it was easy for me to see that the true emotional horror from the shooting was partially eased by the success of the Golden Knights. Las Vegas, a city known for its high per capita rate of churches only for marriage reasons, not worship, used the hockey team games as a place to gather and remember the victims, much the way a traditional city would use its cathedrals." Close quote. Ben then concluded his observation with this confession, quote, "Even as an atheist, I have been converted to hockey. Through the obvious emotional catharsis it has given the city, it creates a weird sense of irrational civic pride." Close quote. A final example. Last fall in Los Angeles, a football game provided an occasion for sports to minister to people who had suffered after the deadly shooting at the Borderline Grill, and to hundreds of others who had been displaced by the Woolsey fire that continued to rage throughout the Los Angeles region. Part of the healing process began with their being given tickets to the NFL Monday night game between the Rams and the Chiefs. Upon entry to the Coliseum, fans were handed rally towels emblazoned with the motto, "LA Together," and the game itself was dedicated to those who had suffered from the mass shooting and the Woolsey fire. During pregame ceremonies, players on both teams wore dark gray hats emblazoned with the logos of the Los Angeles area firefighters and law enforcement agencies, and a cadre of first responders led the Rams onto the field. Then, beginning the consecration process for the field, the presentation of colors was performed by an honor guard from the Ventura County Sheriff's Department, one of whose officers, Ron Ellis, had been killed at the massacre at the dance bar. Also fatally wounded in that shooting was Justin Meek, a choral student at California Lutheran University. While his choir sang the national anthem, families of the first responders stretched a flag across the field. And completing the sanctifying pre-game ceremonies, Helis's widow and son honored his life by lighting the torch above the Coliseum. While most of the fans left the game giddy after the historic scoring battle, LA Rams 54, KC Chiefs 51, a poignant gathering took place in the east end of the end zone. Two of the game's star players, quarterback Jared Goff and offensive lineman Andrew Whitworth, stopped to express sympathy to the bereaved and to support for those who had been displaced. The pervasive perversion of sports as an American civil religion is probably caused by the merger of the spirit of competition with the values of capitalism, particularly manifest in gambling enterprises and the astronomical salaries that threaten to annul the play element and autotelic character of sports, which are essential aspects of their spiritual potential. Although gambling had been a part of the communal activities surrounding the Nexo and Mayan games, modern gambling on sports had moved beyond wagers by onlookers to bets and actions by players and officials, and by doing so, gambling has corrupted games. Among the most notable offenders have been baseball stars Pete Rose, who gambled on games that he managed, and shoeless Joe Jackson and 7 of his White Sox teammates who accepted mobsters' bribes to throw the 1919 World Series. For their actions, all were excommunicated from major leagues by the commission. Organized crime has also infested the world of collegiate basketball. Between 1948 and 1950, when 32 players from 7 universities accepted payments to shave points in more than 80 games. Institutional penalties included CCNY being forced to vacate its national championship from the previous year, and the University of Kentucky receiving the death penalty for a year. Equally nefarious to the corruption of sports by players was the subversive activity of former NBA referee Tim Donaghy, who was a gambling addict. Even though he adjusted his officiating to favor his wagers, his gambling debts mounted to such a degree that mobsters proposed that he participate in a scheme to provide them with classified information about players' injuries. His tips proved to be so reliable that the gamblers more than doubled his reward to more than $5,000 per scoop. Following Donaghy's arrest and guilty plea, NBA Commissioner David Stern issued a formal statement that the NBA would cooperate with legal efforts, quote, to bring justice to an individual who has betrayed the most sacred trust in professional sports, close quote. Sacred trust associated with referees? Yes, because their duty is to protect the integrity of the game. Other forms of cheating also threaten principles of sports. In professional football, quarterback Tom Brady of the New England Patriots used underinflated footballs to win a home playoff game. And on other occasions, his team's coaches illegally video recorded the defensive play signals of arch-rival New York Jets, and during other home games, Patriots staff intercepted opponents' play calls via wiretapping. Stealing signals in a different sport, the San Francisco Giants one season paid an employee to sit in the center field bleachers and use binoculars to see the catcher's call for pitches, and then to relay the information to the Giants bench. Yet more extensive than these game-related thefts was the 16-month practice of hacking the Houston Astros player database by a St. Louis Cardinals scouting director. Not only have various players, coaches, and executives broken multiple rules, in recent days, a new sports-related conspiracy has emerged. Although corrupt collegiate admissions might not initially seem to be connected to sports, the infernal plan masterminded by William Singer reveals the potential demonization of power that sports provide. As one sports columnist in Los Angeles wrote recently about a coach and athletic director, if, quote, if sports weren't so important, athletes wouldn't have different sets of standards for university admissions, and parents like actress Lori Loughlin wouldn't have been able to have them apply to her presumably underqualified daughter, close quote. For my lecture this afternoon, this is a perverse irony that Singer routinely described the fraudulent use of preferential athletic admission standards to clients as, quote, the home run of home runs because it works every time. In addition to the deviant ways to cheat in a sport and to cheat the game itself, a climate of violence and a culture of sexual abuse also plague contemporary sports. While aggressive physical contact is intrinsic to many sports, football, rugby, hockey, lacrosse, wrestling, boxing, excessive force causes irreparable injury. Among the most calculated and vicious violations in football has been the bounty offered by a New Orleans Saints coach to his players to disable the Packers quarterback in the NFC Championship game. As a Bears fan, though, I must admit I have some qualms about whether or not that was true. Brutal hits throughout a game and season have led to a culture of violence that extends beyond the field or ring and that it threatens the play element that is essential to the lure of sports. For decades, the NFL flatly and flagrantly denied the connection between football collisions and head trauma, despite veterans complaining about cognitive dysfunction, some shortly before committing suicide. Before his death in 2011, resulting from a gunshot through the heart, former Chicago Bear defensive back Dave Dorson texted family members that he wanted his brain to be used for research. And a year later, former All-Pro linebacker Junior Seau killed himself in the same way so that his brain would be intact in post-mortem examination. In a very real sense, their actions were prophetic protests akin to the self-immolation of Buddhist priests during the Vietnam War. The brains of Dorson and Seau were included in an independent scientific study conducted by Dr. Ann McKee. Her researchers analyzed the brains of more than 100 former NFL players, and their findings revealed that all but one showed signs of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, whose effects include memory dysfunctions, disorientation, dementia, and other mental and physical disorders. Like the NFL, the NHL has been remiss in dealing with the reality and brain trauma caused by blows to the head. In fact, the NHL commissioner continues to insist that there is no proof of a connection between hockey's hard hits to the head and CTE. And the NHL recently won, rather than settled, it won a suit filed by players related to head injuries that they had sustained during play. Meanwhile, former Hockey Hall of Famer Ken Dryden has publicly challenged why there is an official but perverse rule that identifies which hits to the head are legal. Tragically, the climate of violence in sports extends beyond the field and rink to domestic relations. All too frequently, NFL and collegiate players are cited for physical assault on their domestic partners. In response to the swelling pattern of domestic abuse, the NFL commissioner introduced a new conduct policy that levies a 6-game suspension for a first offense of sexual assault or physical abuse, and a lifetime ban following a second offense. The policy claims to hold players and personnel to a higher standard of conduct that is responsible, lawful, and consistent with the values of the NFL. Yet the NFL's higher standard is dubious since the league has been inconsistent in its conduct of investigations and its applications of penalties. During last season, for instance, linebacker Reuben Foster of the San Francisco 49ers was charged with domestic abuse after having been involved in 2 previous violent incidents with his girlfriend. Following his arrest, the 49ers immediately released him, but the Washington team claimed him on waivers. And although the league suspended him temporarily from playing, it nevertheless allowed him to practice with his new team for the rest of the season. And less than a week ago, the NFL investigation officially concluded that his actions had not actually broken the league conduct rules, and therefore would not require his suspension. So he was simply fined 2 games pay. The penalty fits with the pattern of supposed disciplinary action by the NFL. And according to NFL analyst Jared Nathan, quote, "The NFL doesn't want to make headlines by disciplining its own players," close quote. As part of the climate of violence that engulfs contact sports, patterns of sexual abuse have become entrenched in several other sports. Sports historian Richard Crepeau regularly tracks unscrupulous and illegal behavior by players and sports organizations, always calling for justice and reforms. Quote, "Among all of the dysfunctional organizations in contemporary sports world, USA Gymnastics seems to be the leader. The Larry Nassar abuse case peeled back the veneer of competitive success and revealed an ugliness unmatched in recent memory." Close quote. More than 150 women, many of whom spoke openly about their experiences of abuse for the first time, testified about Nassar's predatory actions in his official role with the USAG. Their courageous, prophetic witness also gave voice and energy to the Me Too movement. The prophetic actions by athletes do more than call for penalties against offenders. They demand systemic change that is more extensive than that warranted by disciplinary actions. Make no mistake, the prophetic function of sports is not about projecting point spreads or predicting Super Bowl winners or World Series champions. Although I must note that 3 years ago, at the LA chapter of the Society for American Baseball Research, I submitted my projection for the World Series contestants and had the Cubs beating the Indians in the World Series. Regrettably, I didn't go to Vegas. Instead, prophetic action is about how the public stage of sports facilitates opportunities for courageous athletes to expose institutionalized forms of violence, to issue a call to justice, and to envision an alternate way of construing the world. As philosopher Mark Kingwell avers, quote, "A game without ostensible point or purpose can be the site of protest or the raising of consciousness. Such results can always be judged extraneous to the internal appeal of the game. They are nevertheless made possible by way of it." Close quote. Introducing his book, The Prophetic Imagination, Walter Brueggemann specifies that the task of prophetic ministry is to nurture, nourish, and evoke consciousness and perception, alternative to the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us. Close quote. Brueggemann's description of prophetic ministry applies effectively to non-ecclesial organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center, and it can also be aligned with sports that provide occasions for prophetic protests and for the creation and cultivation of hope. In a recent essay applying Brueggemann's profile of prophetic imagination to courageous sports action, Terry Shoemaker argues that because the public veneration of sports, because of the public generation of sports facilities, they are predisposed to becoming venues for prophetic action. in a brief collection of essays that he recently edited. Shoemaker concludes that the identity of prophetic action can be identified with a baseball park, a football field, and a basketball court as sites for prophetic action by athletes protesting racism. The essays focus on the courageous character of Jackie Robinson and the effectual protests against racist political actions by NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick and Knox College basketball player Ariana Smith. The players' use of the national anthem as a vehicle to raise awareness about the systemic discrimination of African Americans resembles the efforts by Olympic medalists Juan Carlos and Tommy Smith in 1968 when they affirmed Black power as they bowed their heads and raised their fists during the playing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Like Kaepernick and Smith, whose sports careers essentially ended because of their actions, Carlos and Smith were forced to forfeit their medals. Now, I regret that I cut out a portion about specific sports penalties and such, but I have a clip here for Professor Rosengarten that shows the Indiana basketball coach involved in an intense bid. And the Prophetic Dimension of Sports book by Shoemaker is available. And finally, the Kaepernick and Carlos Smith and Carlos and Smith. In addition to these two examples, there are others that prophetic actions by a fan favorite and another ball at a ballpark. A year before the Mexico City Olympiad, Detroit Tigers outfielder Willie Horton was instrumental in quelling the violence during the riots in Detroit. After leaving Tiger Stadium in his uniform, he walked into the mayhem, climbed atop one of the demolished cars, and boldly demanded calm. His role as a prophet blended with that of a priest when, the following year, he used baseball again to integrate the city into a system of meaning and belonging. In his autobiography, he recalled the Tigers' role in healing the city. Quote, "I believe that the 1968 Tigers were put here by God to heal the city. It started to become clear to me that our team had an assignment that was even more important than winning a pennant. It seemed to me that there was some divine inspiration at work here. It seemed to me that the Tigers' real undertaking in 1968 was to help unify the city of Detroit, to bring black and white together. Our aim was to restore harmony to an area that had been a battleground for 4 days during the summer before. Our mission was to heal the city." Close quote. Prophetic action does not have to be well publicized to be effective, as was a protest by Bill Veeck 5 years before Jackie Robinson's breakthrough with the Dodgers. Having become part owner of the minor league Milwaukee Brewers during the early 1940s, Veeck effectively wielded his financial clout in challenging the law about segregated seating at the ballpark in Ocala, Florida, where his team trained in spring each year. After Veeck joined the fans in the designated colored section of the grandstands during one of the preseason games, the Marion Sheriff ordered him to move, but he refused. When Veeck returned to the same section the following day, the mayor arrived to support the sheriff in his effort to enforce the law. Immediately, Veeck threatened to relocate his team to another city, and almost as fast, the mayor acquiesced, and the sheriff retreated, since they did not want the local economy to lose jobs and revenue generated by the games, and the expenditures of tourists, and especially the team's month-long occupancy in the Ocala Hotel. Thereafter, Veeck returned daily to the colored section, where he sat for the remainder of spring training. As Martin Marty suggests in his essay on two kinds of civil religion, the prophetic form of religion afflicts the comfortable. Indeed, the prophetic practices by athletes disrupts the status quo in America. Their prophetic postures and speeches in sports venues have provided public critique of institutionalized violence manifested in the structures and practices of racism. Yet for all of their social progress that has been prompted by the prophetic acts of Jackie Robinson and the courageous abused witnesses against Nasser, much more needs to be done to dissolve racism and to heal the culture of sexual abuse. Other institutions of injustice also stand ready for prophetic action by athletes and sports executives who can lead sports and society toward a true meritocracy, toward a healthier expression of civil religion. In sports, such a meritocratic system is one that determines playing time based on performance, regardless of one's sexual, political, or religious orientation, or of one's race or gender. Already promising, prophetic actions by athletes have begun to address the culture of sports violence and the discrimination of women. Days after the findings of Dr. McKee's research were published in the New England Journal of Medicine, John Urschel, an offensive lineman for the Baltimore Ravens, announced his early retirement. Urschel, who had then been working on his PhD in mathematics at MIT, had suffered an on-field concussion 2 years earlier. And for weeks thereafter, his cognitive skills had been severely dulled. His abrupt retirement called further attention to the significance of head injuries in contact sports. And a final example of promise, although girls and women have been excluded from play by Major League Baseball and its affiliated leagues, left-handed pitcher Isla Borders has broken the barrier preventing women from playing on professional men's teams. After becoming the first female to compete in baseball in NCAA history when she played for the Whittier College Poets in 1998, she competed professionally for the St. Paul Saints. During 4 seasons with the team, she stood up for women and withstood harassment by players and their partners. In several respects, her actions, her courageous action, and that by Urschel, exemplify the Burleman's description of prophetic ministry as the evocation and nurture of alternative ways to construe the world. Until the Cubs win the next World Series, I could continue to develop and augment the details and examples about priestly, perverse, and prophetic practices of sports as an American civil religion. But since we don't have another decade or century to wait, let me conclude this presentation by circling back to Bella. While his analysis of American civil religion embraces the concept of God as a central symbol and repeatedly draws on the biblical archetypes of chosen people, New Jerusalem, sacrificial death, and rebirth, the civil religion of sports does not posit such a theistic orientation, nor does it align its values with biblical themes. Yet sports can facilitate a transcendental experience for players and for fans. During competition, an athlete can enjoy a sense of mystical unity, not only with teammates, but also with a force beyond oneself in an experience of flow. An athlete can also utilize her or his prominent posture and voice to exercise prophetic protests against corruption and oppression, and the communal experience of beauty and mystery within a sporting event can generate a frightening depth of meaning for players and fans alike. Thank you.
Professor Price will take his own questions.
And then I'll come. I'm delighted to, oh, okay. Yes.
Tiger Woods winning the Masters. It seemed to me that the television reporting on that was almost over the top and was transcendent value. And the only thing that could have been different had been on Easter rather than. Since you never mentioned golf, do you see that in any of the terms that you've suggested?
Yes, there is a fabulous work entitled Golf in the Kingdom. The author's name. I can see the cover of the book. You can Google it. It's available. He's associated with the Esalen Institute, I believe. So, you know, it's got to be about anyway. The Golf in the Kingdom is, in many respects, a celebration of a kind of discipline that's involved in being able to master both the long and the short game, and putting, which I couldn't do. So I highly recommend it, and the film The Legends of Bagger Vance has all kinds of resonance with various South Asian spiritual tradition and texts. So yes, I don't think that the television commentators were using either the text or the film as ways to celebrate Tiger's resurrection. But certainly, what fascinates me is not so much the fact that he won, but the fact that he models, he exemplifies working through so many different depths of human suffering to resume the strength of a professional vocation. To go from number 1 to number 780 in the world in terms of ranking, and then to win the Masters again is a reversal that is just remarkable.
You focus mostly, almost exclusively on professional sports.
Yes.
You love the University of Chicago.
Yes.
And the University of Chicago, very notably in the late 1930s, eliminated big-time Division I athletics, and withdrew from the Big Ten. Which it would strike me as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, probably many people in here would think that was a good decision. On the other hand, as someone who came to the university fairly recently from the outside, the challenges of community building and how one would convene the entire community here in a moment of crisis are not quite as readily available. And I wonder if you would, think about these two loves you have, and I wonder how you reconcile them at this institution.
Whittier also plays Division III, so I celebrate the scholar athlete. I've had the privilege of teaching and mentoring 2 Rhodes Scholars, both of whom were exceptional athletes and students. So the model of Division III is one that I heartily endorse. And yet, the kind of allegiance that a major sports program is probably that dialectic of the judgmental that the prophetic can provide in ways that I haven't fully sorted out. But I live with that tension daily as I watch the ineptitude of our football team, or the poets, our cheers quill, poets quill. The ineptitude of that, as opposed to a Big Ten team that's a run-of-the-mill team that still is able to garner the enthusiasm of 75,000 participants on Saturday afternoon. I did not reflect in the presentation about the way that Virginia Tech University had used its sports programs as the vehicles for healing following the the tragic massacre there as well. Yes?
You spoke about how sport can be used to allay or to bring to light issues of sexual violence. However, we must admit that women are largely absent in the space of professional sport. We see women's leagues shutting down. We see very low attendance. How can we understand the place of women in this civil religion? Are women there?
That's where I think Isle of Orders has done a remarkable thing, and she suggests that the first woman who will probably play in the major leagues will come from Asia, where girls are encouraged to continue and are coached as adolescents. For the most part, girls are discouraged from playing baseball after Little League, but the World Championship of Women's Leagues occurred in Florida, I believe, 6 weeks ago, baseball. Who knew that the U.S. had a team? It was not covered by the media. So part of the issue is media. Wonderfully, Title IX has generated much more institutional support for women in athletics. We need now to move beyond that to promote not only the excellence of the women in athletic competition, but also as being able to be celebrated by fans. And that's an issue that gets to one of the corruptions of money being that it's following what will sell the most advertising for networks. There was another.
Yes, I don't know if you know George Carlin's brilliant routine on discourse, but I'd like you to reflect on the difference between the liturgical languages of a couple of sports and what they may tell us about those civil religions.
Oh, in baseball, it's about sacrifice. Right now, I can't think of the wonderful bit he did on football and its space, among other things. But I ran into Carlin at LAX once and commented on that and how I liked the kind of theological sophistication that he brought to his reflection on the religious language in the two sports. And he basically said, well, I grew up basically across the street from Union Seminary and Columbia University. Why wouldn't I think of that? But that's for future. Thanks, and I'll work on the language. I suggest we enjoy some refreshments.
So your name has been added to the plaque in this room that commemorates our alum for the year. Now, the alum of the year is chosen by the alumni board and by the BTU trustees, but the gift to the alum of the year, that's the dean's office's prerogative. For many years, that prerogative was filled by a very wonderful artist who did a regular gift for us, and that artist is now retired. And so we are now putting our full game, for us to become one of the joys of the office, to think how to honor Joe Price. The answer, of course, was obvious, although only Madison and Barbara could have come up with it. The answer was obvious. We prepared for you a set of baseball cards. One is of you, one is of Lemon Gilkey, one is of the angel above us, one is of the coffee shop, various stats. Now this is your set, not to be traded. For steps below in the common room, please feel free to take them with you after the reception. Some are very rare, command very high prices.